Good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome and thanks for joining us today. It's another beautiful Scottish morning today, so thanks for choosing to watch us on Zoom. I'm John Moffat. I'm Director at Benson Wood and Co, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. We're based in Airdrie, North Lanarkshire, and we work with many owner-managed businesses providing business advisory, accountancy, tax, VAT, bookkeeping and cloud accounting services and payroll services. And talking about payroll services, I'll make my first introduction today. Yvonne Harper has joined us and she's our new payroll and HR specialist at Benson Wood and Co. She joined our payroll team on Monday. She looks way too young for this, but she's got over 20 years experience in payroll and HR. I'm delighted that our clients will benefit from that experience going forward. Just some quick admin points. There's a Q&A box on Zoom. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. So any questions you do have, if you can type them in the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end. So again, welcome to our webinar. We've called this webinar Business Challenges, the New Age of Work. And we'll cover office versus home working, changing terms and conditions in employment contracts, managing staff remotely, and finally, vaccinations, some issues in practice. What we need coming out of lockdown is certainty and clarity, and our aim is to provide that to you today. So let me introduce our presenter today. Her name's Caroline Cockbain, and Caroline is an Associate Director at Just Employment Law, who provide employment law support to employers in the UK. I've looked up Caroline's LinkedIn profile and I see too that she has over 20 years experience as a solicitor, and again looks way too young for that to have reached that milestone. So over to you, Caroline, and I'll speak again at the end.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm delighted to be here with Benson Wood and Co on behalf of Just Employment Law this morning. It's a very topical area that we're going to be looking at today. Lots of uncertainty, lots of movement, nobody quite clear on what the future holds for employers, for employees, and for the workplace as we at least used to know it. One of the main areas that I am working with clients on at the moment is the idea of work location and what might be needed going forward. So I thought it was useful to start off today, to kick off today's session with a little bit of a look at the comparisons between office and home working and what you as employers might want to be thinking about as we move through this stage of the pandemic. I suppose when we look back over the past 15 months, the pandemic and I suppose the speed at which businesses had to adapt meant that for many employers, there were changes to the way that business was done, changes to the way that employees worked, and often at speed and often without little advanced planning, or at least the planning that you might ordinarily put into place before you make such significant changes. And I think where we're at the moment, economic recovery will be gradual. Business will continue to move forward. Who knows what the recovery will look like? Different sectors will experience different things. But it's important to think, well, are we actually going to get back to the workplace as we actually knew it before the beginning of last year? Who may want what moving forwards? It will vary depending on the employer, depending on the nature of your business, depending on your clients and customers' businesses and the sector that you work in. For some employers, perhaps there has been little change to the way that business is done or work is undertaken purely because of perhaps manufacturing or other sectors who need to have people in place with machinery or equipment to do what they need to do. But for many where location can and has been more flexible over the past year, it will be important to think about how that has worked for your business. Whether there have been challenges, presumably there have been. It's been such a drastic change. I don't imagine many employers will have adapted to it smoothly without any bumps in the road. But the experience that different employers will have had will be different. And there will be some successes and some things that maybe haven't worked quite so well for the business. So when looking at what the future might hold, I think it's really important to reflect on how we have done, how the business has done over the past year or so, and what parts of that can be adapted for the longer term, what parts of it have worked for your business, and maybe what the concerns or challenges have been to build that into your thinking. I suppose when looking to return to the office or to the workplace, an employer will also have to think about your business needs from a staffing perspective. Some of you will have utilised the government's furlough scheme. Others may have looked at restructuring or redundancy type processes, or that may be something that you haven't decided on yet, but may have to think about in the months to come. Other employers I know have dealt with things by recruitment freezing, by not filling natural wastage when it has happened in teams. So there's lots of different options and perhaps necessities to consider as things start to pick up to a greater degree in the months to come. And what's going to be right isn't a very easy thing to pinpoint quite now. It'll be a balancing act of putting lots of different factors into the pot and deciding what's best for the business, but also best for your employees, and then trying to come up with some sort of combination that works for both sides. From an employment law perspective, it's going to be important to think about what policies and procedures you have in place within your workplace at the moment. What do they say about how and where work is done? What do your employees' contracts say? What are the employees expecting of you going forward? Have you had any communications with staff about what you're expecting? And if so, how have employees responded? Obviously, the employer can drive a process and discuss these matters with employees, but it's important to bear in mind that employees also have a statutory or legal right to request flexible working. So just because the employer may say we want you all back in the workplace doesn't mean that employees are prevented from asking for something differently. Now, if you receive a flexible working request, it doesn't mean that you have to grant it, but you do have to be reasonable and considerate. And actually, after I finalised today's slides, you may have seen the announcement this morning that's been publicised in the news that the government has set up a think tank to look at the possibility of changing the law to introduce some sort of default right for employees to ask to continue to work from home. Obviously not at all clear at the moment as to what that legislative change might look like, how it might impact on businesses and the extent to which that right might come in. But it's certainly something that, as I woke up this morning, I thought, well, we need to factor that into everything as a potential caveat to what you might want to do moving forward. So it's one to watch and see what happens in that respect. When we think about office working, perhaps the way that many of us used to know it as the norm when we went to work, there are clear benefits of working from a workplace, from an office, from some sort of company or employer building. Communication is something that we have all had to do very differently, not least as we're doing today in a Zoom session. Interaction has become virtual, has become much more adaptable, but certainly I think there's still something to be said from a communication perspective of having everybody in the same location, whether it's popping into an office to have a quick chat, whether it's pulling people together for staff meetings, whether it's being able to plan without having to pre-plan for planning, having everybody in the same locations, staff interaction on all of these areas, and from a social and emotional perspective, is probably easier in most cases to do in the office environment. And of course, as we've all been working from home or from different locations for months, lucky if you've avoided perhaps IT and infrastructure challenges from time to time, the odd Zoom call dropping off or broadband not stacking up. But certainly from an office management perspective, from a work tools perspective, and from a reliability and IT perspective, again, office working lends itself largely to that working without challenge. That said, certainly there have been many reports and many experiences of benefits of home working over this past 15 months or so. I think that there is a clear well-being point to bear in mind for home working, and many employees have welcomed and embraced the opportunity to work from home and have thrived on it. Although it's important to bear in mind that it hasn't been the best environment for some employees. So yes, well-being might have been encouraged and enhanced for many, but not all, and some will be looking forward to coming back to some sort of more structured office environment. Productivity has been reported to have improved in some areas from home working. Obviously, people are maybe not having to commute, maybe not having to spend time traveling, and may have more time from a home work-life balance perspective, which is a benefit. Some have experienced less interruptions. They've been able to devote more time to simply focusing on the work that they are required to do. And of course, from an employer's perspective, that does require trust to be put into employees that they will be doing what they are required to during the working day. But I think having that trust in employees and allowing them to get on with the work must give a morale boost to a staff, which is a benefit. And there may be cost reductions for businesses, perhaps office costs, heating, lighting, all sorts of associated costs with running a business may have reduced as a result of most or some staff working from home. So as we look to the future, there are obviously a range of issues to consider. And as I said, it's not only about the business needs, what your organisation or company may need. You will equally be mindful of what your clients and your customers need. They may require certain people to be in certain places at certain times. Contact and timings issues may come up. And these have to be considered alongside the needs and wishes of your staff. Obviously, health and safety is a big issue and has been for many months for all of us. Whilst today isn't a health and safety focused session, employers obviously have a duty to safeguard the health and safety and welfare of staff in the workplace. So whether people are working from home or whether they are working in the office, those duties equally apply. So it's important to factor in your health and safety obligations as you determine how to move forward in your business. Obviously, again, from a health and safety perspective, risk assessments and making sure that your environment for your employees is COVID secure and safe in that respect is something that no doubt most of you will have turned your mind to already. But returning to the workplace isn't going to be a quick thing. I can't imagine many employers will require employees who have been working from home on the Friday to all turn up permanently from the office on a Monday, if that's what you end up deciding to do. And I think it's important for employers to think about the transition to allow everybody to agree or at least understand what's being proposed and to work towards that in a smooth or at least as smooth a way as possible. The challenge, I suppose, might be is that with things still changing week to week in some cases, you may not be entirely clear on how your sector or how your industry or how your business is going to need different things in the months to come. So if there is still going to be change in many cases, I think as an employer, it's important to still have the flexibility and understanding that you will no doubt have had when things have been changeable over the past 15 months. And I think with that in mind, employers will have to maybe consider requests for particular working arrangements from employees in the short term. It may be something that your employees come and ask you about, and it may be that you can't give long-term guarantees or long-term solutions to what they are asking you for, but there may be interim arrangements that you can and should be putting in place to try and move forward with each phase of the new world. How you can make it work? Well, as I say, consider the business needs, identify what your proposals are, think about what you need, what you think you need. And I've worked with a number of clients who have taken those proposals and their thoughts out to their staff for feedback, for input, and to enable there to be a collaborative approach on what is going to be the best way forward for all. Obviously, business needs are likely to take priority, but I don't recommend simply implementing them blindly without listening to staff and thinking about any issues or concerns that are raised. Now, staff may have general similar issues that affect all, or there could be individual case-by-case issues that come up personally for staff, and it would be prudent to consider them carefully before moving forward and implementing anything. So once you've had the feedback from staff about what you're proposing to do, you would want to revisit your proposals and think, well, does that change our view at all on what we are proposing to do in terms of location and working arrangements moving forward? And I think, as I say, whatever you come up with at the moment, if you are communicating with staff, you would want to build in a degree of flexibility to enable you to change in the future, should you need to. Obviously, the Employment Rights Act requires employers to issue written statements of terms and conditions, and one of the most ordinary of terms to go into that contract, that terms and conditions statement, is the workplace, the place of work or the work location. So any changes to place of work or changes to things like reporting line or job roles, or perhaps different confidentiality obligations that might be worthy of clarification if work location changes are happening in the longer term, they will all amount to a change to the employee's terms and conditions. And it's important to remember that in the vast majority of cases, they cannot simply be imposed on employees, and there can be risks in simply imposing terms and conditions changes without employee consent. So the best thing to do is to consult with staff around any changes and make sure that the employee agrees to any changes to the contract that you're proposing. Once agreement is obtained from the employee, once you've got that consent and that agreement on the way forward, it's important and helpful from a housekeeping perspective to document the changes. And I would always suggest that a variation letter to the contract, referring to the discussions you've had, referring to the terms that you've discussed and the agreed changes, and importantly, when they will take effect from. And bearing in mind the flexibility and still changeable nature of what we're all dealing with from a workplace perspective, it may be appropriate in certain cases to build in trial periods or temporary time periods for certain changes rather than making it a permanent change at that time. Managing staff remotely has been a challenge for many employers. Many managers will not have had experience of managing people virtually, not having that physical contact, that physical perhaps eye line or sight of how employees are doing. And I think if you are a business that is going to facilitate staff working from home, either partly or fully during a week, it's going to be important that perhaps more than you've done or been able to do so far, because of the reactive nature of the adaptations that have been made, you need to ensure the physical and virtual setup meets the needs of the employees. So think about workstations, think about the access that employees have to everything that they need, think about health and safety, and think about the different forms of support and communication that you're going to have to adopt going forward. Now, hopefully, you have been speaking to your staff over the past year and you have set up a way of working, whether it's one-to-ones by Teams or Zoom, whether it's regular calls, whether there is some clients that I've worked with have sort of messenger approaches where people dip in and say hello and catch up. And I think that regular communication is something that's really important and a key point for success of managing staff remotely. I think it's important where staff are not physically together and physically in work, as it were, to reinforce and to keep live your company values, because I think it's very easy for somebody sitting in their house, isolated, to forget what part of a bigger company or organization they are. So having that living, breathing company values and communication is going to enhance the connection to colleagues. I think trust is, as I said, very important when staff are working from home. Some employers have got concerns, and obviously from an employment law perspective, if there are challenges that come up from staff who are working from home, whether it's performance or concerns or perhaps even conduct issues, sometimes it can be a little bit trickier to get to the bottom of what's going on when staff aren't physically in the same building as you. But it would be important to still follow process and take advice when any concerns come up. I am aware that there are some monitoring software out there that allows you to look at staff working arrangements, but again, it's not a data protection seminar, but I think transparency of what you are monitoring is incredibly important. You would want to have a policy in place, and you would want to make sure that your privacy notices for staff clearly tell them what you are monitoring and when in advance, so that you don't become unstuck in that respect. In terms of communication, obviously what you're trying to do is keep people part of a team, make sure that people's welfare is being met, but also from a pure work perspective, making sure that when people are sitting at home working on, they are clear on the objectives and expectations that their employer has on them. So yes, deal with issues and concerns when they arise. And I think, if you're not in the same building, acknowledging the effort that staff are going to will never do you wrong. Think about how staff are presenting, whether it's on a team call, whether it's how they're behaving on a telephone call, or sometimes where they're not engaging with you. Is behaviour changing? Are people becoming quieter or perhaps less engaged? Be alert to behaviours changing, because from a welfare perspective, you would want to reach out and just say, how are you getting on, in case there are any issues there that you can help and support an employee with. Obviously, it's a challenging time at the moment for new people to join employers. And I think if you do have people who are starting from a remote working perspective, who don't have that induction in your premises and getting to meet everybody in person, it's important to bear in mind the additional considerations that you want to build into settling them in. So you would want to adapt your induction processes, do whatever you can to help staff understand your business, and try and facilitate in some way a degree, perhaps more, of interaction with colleagues, so that they have that welcome that you would ordinarily give if they were face-to-face. And obviously, if new starts are joining and they don't have that mentoring in the early stages, try and be as clear as you can on the role that the person is going to do, and identify what training you need to put in place and how you're going to manage that from a remote perspective. So that's my thoughts, a snapshot of thoughts on what the future might look like for office versus home working, and what the benefits and perhaps issues arising from both might be. Certainly, I'll be pleased to hear from any of you what your experiences of working in the pandemic have been, what your concerns perhaps might be about what the future holds for work location and work arrangements from home. But moving on to look at a slightly different but still very topical and novel area is vaccinations, and where do employers stand. I think obviously the vaccination programme is continuing to roll out, but it's important from an employer's perspective to bear in mind that not everybody can have the vaccine for various reasons, and not everybody wants to have the vaccine. So it's important to remember that there is no one-size-fits-all answer to your vaccination questions. And because it's a new area, and we don't have case law or precedent for what an employer is expected to do, what we can do is try and identify the issues and navigate circumstances and issues as they arise. And what I've identified today is a few questions that I've seen in practice coming up, and I thought I would share some thoughts to try and help equip you for when they may arise in your business. So as I said, that an employer has a duty to ensure the health and safety of staff as far as reasonably practicable. But one of the questions that I have come across is whether there are any circumstances in which an employer can require an employee to have the vaccine. At the moment, there is no legal obligation to be vaccinated. It's a free choice, and consent would be needed by everybody individually to be vaccinated. The government has recently announced that they are looking to introduce mandatory vaccination in the care sector unless exemptions apply. But I think even with that intention, there are certain employment law legal issues that do still come up for consideration. And I think from an employer-employee relationship perspective, obviously employees have to follow reasonable management instructions when carrying out their role. But would it be a reasonable instruction to be vaccinated, to take the vaccine into your personal body? It's a difficult a new area. And I think what you would have to do is think about why you were asking employees to be vaccinated. And in the vast majority of employers, I think there will be challenges around that question, because you would need to think about whether it's required in your policies, and if so, why. Is it necessary for the employee to be vaccinated to actually fulfil their role? And is there any discrimination issues coming from that sort of blanket approach across your workforce from an indirect discrimination perspective? It's certainly an emotive and sensitive topic, and everybody has and is entitled to their own personal views on it. But I think it's important to engage with your health and safety guidance, your advisors, and think about what's best for your business, and work towards coming up with a workplace policy, engaging with staff about what you are wanting to do before implementing. Would it be a reasonable instruction? I think you would have to weigh up all these factors case by case and dependent on your business. So I think that's the way to go about questioning whether you could, in any circumstances, require somebody to be vaccinated. I said that not everybody wants to be vaccinated. Why might an employee object to vaccination? And what issues are there for you to face there? Well, some employees will be advised on health grounds not to be vaccinated. And if somebody has an underlying health, mental health or physical health condition which has a substantial adverse impact on their day-to-day activities, then there could be disability discrimination issues there that need to be factored in to how you deal with any concerns raised about vaccination from staff. Some employees may have religious grounds or pregnancy reasons for not wanting to or being able to take up the vaccine. And I suppose it's perhaps going to be less of an issue as the vaccination programme rolls out, but certainly over the past few months where certain age categories haven't had access to the vaccine, there could be age discrimination issues there by simply taking a blanket approach across your business. People obviously feel rightly protective of their health and their medical history and status. And I think it's important to bear in mind that any discussions or communications with staff around vaccination requires strict confidentiality. And it's going to be important when weighing up things like data protection rights and discrimination, avoiding needs, to make sure that you're not treating anybody less favourably on grounds of protected characteristics such as religion or age or pregnancy. So avoiding less favourable treatment in connection with that. Staff may not like what employers are proposing, but that's why dialogue is going to be really important around the policy that you're proposing to implement. So listening again to staff feedback is going to be really important, particularly to avoid grievances. And in extreme cases, I suppose it's not inconceivable that somebody may feel strongly enough about a position being adopted by their employer that they might resign over it and potentially think about, if they've got service, to do so, to bring a constructive unfair dismissal claim. But there's certainly legal risks that need to be borne in mind. So case by case assessment is likely to be helpful. What should you do if employees are nervous or worried about coming back into the office environment? Handle it carefully, I think, is my overall comment. I think you will have your health and safety input. You will no doubt have your risk assessments, have those prepared before there's any suggestion of people coming back to the workplace. I know of a few employers that have openly shared their health and safety risk assessments with explanatory comments around that, so that staff can feel comforted by the extent to which employers have prepared for people coming back. But again, listening to staff concerns is going to be really key, particularly because if an employee reasonably believes that returning to the workplace would put them in a position of serious and imminent danger, they are entitled to take steps to protect themselves and entitled to avoid or not being subject to a detriment or dismissal because of that. So, and that is regardless of the length of service. It doesn't tie in with the 2 years that would have ordinary unfair dismissal threshold consideration. So any of your staff may have reasonably held health and safety concerns about coming back, and there could be legal implications for you for ignoring them. So again, careful handling is very important. And I think what you would need to think about is whether the belief of the danger is reasonable. Try and reassure staff about what you have done to counteract the concerns that they've got, and try and factor in the extent to which you are hopefully following official guidance to try and persuade and let staff understand what you've done in light of their concerns shared with you. Can an employee be dismissed for refusing vaccination? I think it would be risky at the moment, generally speaking. I think we will see case law, we will see tribunal claims in due course, I imagine, on this point. it's worthwhile bearing in mind, thinking back to my comments about whether it's a reasonable management instruction to be vaccinated, and not entirely clear that it would be in many cases. There could be unfair dismissal exposure there, but you need to think about these things on a case-by-case basis, factoring in the employee representations that they're putting to you. I think before you get anywhere near dismissing for refusing vaccination, you would need to think about alternative ways of working. Why are you asking an employee to be vaccinated? Is it for them to go to a client site or to come into an office for some reason? If so, are there other ways that you can work around with the employees still being able to do their job? For example, still continuing to work from home. Would they have to be vaccinated for that? It's worth considering. Could their duties be adjusted as an alternative? Certainly, I think you should take legal advice before contemplating dismissal, simply because of the whole host of different legal issues that can be thrown up from vaccination itself. Are employees legally entitled to time off during working hours to get the vaccine? There's not a legal right to it, but certainly most employers will encourage and can strongly encourage staff to be vaccinated. And I think a reasonable employer will allow employees time off to go and get the vaccine for that reason. I think, as with any medical appointments, being able to pay for time off will keep the workforce relations good. And I think for the time that it takes to go and get a vaccination, it's probably worth thinking about paying staff for the time off to get the vaccination. So certainly allowing people to leave their normal working hours to go and get the vaccination could be a possible reasonable adjustment for your disabled employees under the Equality Act 2010. So think about that again when staff say, can I nip off to go and get my vaccine? I think if you say no, reschedule it, there will certainly be an impact on workplace morale. I think staff will say, well, why are you adopting that approach? And it may affect reputationally your business if in the wider circumstances you're heard to not be supporting staff when they're trying to be vaccinated. That's it. Of course, that there may be instances where it's business critical that an employee is there at a particular time. And I suppose there is the ability to reschedule vaccines if needed, but I would view that very much as a last resort if you can. Again, just to try and avoid any bumps in the road. And it's probably worthwhile also thinking about not counting the time off for the vaccine for absence management purposes and simply allowing it for personal time or some other category of absence on your system. Can an employer require an employee to disclose whether or not they have been vaccinated? Well, it's, the question arises, is it an unnecessary invasion of privacy? And I suppose there will be concerns and issues around from those staff who are either unable or unwilling to be vaccinated. It's a data protection issue as well as a health issue, and health matters are a special category of personal data. So even more careful handling and storing and disclosure of that type of information arises here. And I think you would need as a business to think about why you are looking for that evidence from staff. You would need a lawful basis for holding, for processing that information. So why are you asking for it of your staff? Why are you asking for it now? And what are you actually going to do with that information? And indeed, who's going to have access to it? I think it would have to be very closely and carefully restricted. Some clients that I've spoken to have said, well, taking all that on board, we're just going to go with, staff can tell us that they've been vaccinated or not if they want to. So the voluntary disclosure approach. And I suppose it's worth thinking about whether that might get you to where you need to be from a business perspective, but making it clear that staff are not under an obligation to disclose it to you if they don't want to. So I hope that's been helpful. It's raised some really topical issues, and I'd be delighted to take any questions.
First of all, thanks very much, Caroline. We've got a couple of questions there, which I think Yvonne is going to go through. The first one from Jacqueline, the second one from an anonymous attendee. Can you run through the questions for Caroline, Yvonne?
Hi there, no problem. So Jacqueline has asked, you mentioned an employee's statutory right to make a flexible working request. What does an employer have to do when a request is received?
Right, okay, thanks, Jacqueline. It's a statutory process, a statutory framework. So the the employee needs to make a request in writing, telling you what they do at the moment and what they are looking to change, what their request for that flexibility is, whether it's workplace location, whether it's working hours, whether it's compressed hours, that type of thing. And employees will put a written statement into their employer saying, this is what I'm asking for, this is why I'm asking for it. And importantly, they need to tell you what they anticipate the impact on your business will be and how you might be able to address it, to give you those thoughts for consideration. An employee is entitled to make a statutory flexible working request once every 12 months. So they need to make a statement to confirm that they haven't done so in those previous 12 months as well. And once you get that request, the employer will obviously think about it, but obviously make an arrangement to meet with the employee to discuss the request and to get the employee's input. It will be a good idea in advance of that meeting for an employer to think about what the employee has asked for and the extent to which you can accommodate it. Obviously, you don't go into that meeting with concrete views on yes or no, or we simply can't do that, but it's about teasing out the challenges, asking for the employee's input and how it might work, and coming away from that meeting to consider what your decision is as a business. Either, if there's no problem with what the employee's requested, you can write out to the employee and confirm that the request has been met, or for a reason or another, you may decide that you have to reject the request that's been made. There are 8 specific business grounds that are set out in law for rejecting a flexible working request. So you can't just give them any reason. It has to fit into one of the categories, which include things like inability to recruit additional staff to take up any gaps that might be caused, or inability to rearrange work around existing staff, and detrimental impact on quality or performance, those types of things. And where there are challenges, but you're not quite at a no, you're not sure whether it might work in practice, there is the ability to propose a trial period of the flexible arrangements to let you see how it works for both parties. If you are thinking about a trial period and the employee agrees to it, then you would document that and make sure that you've got the paper trail of what is being considered, what's being trialled, and when the trial period is going to be up. And from an overall timescale perspective, the statutory flexible working scheme needs to have concluded, including handling an outcome for any appeal that might come from an earlier decision. It's usually within 3 months. So if you are implementing a trial period of something to see how it's going to work, you would want the employee's agreement to extend that 3-month period so that you're not breaching the timescales on that. That in a nutshell is how it works.
Thanks very much. We've got an anonymous attendee who's also asked, if our staff have to attend client sites and the client has a policy that only vaccinated individuals are allowed on site, how do we handle that?
It's a really tricky one, and I think it will affect many employers. I think there will be client relationship issues there. There will be work delivery issues there, and it will vary sector to sector. I think having the dialogue with the client about their policy and about who it affects within your workforce is going to be important and helpful there, because it may not affect everybody who works with that client, but sharing the policy with your staff and engaging with them about what that means for people is going to be really important. Obviously, if staff have told you that they've been vaccinated, then you're fine. You can send them to the client. Worth bearing in mind, though, if the client is looking for proof of staff vaccination, because again, that's a data protection issue, and you'll need to factor in with your staff the basis upon which you would share that special personal data with a third party before you do that. I think for those who either are not vaccinated or aren't able to or don't want to tell you if they've been vaccinated, I think you would need to sit down and talk to them case by case about it. I don't think there's a clear answer there, but I think what you would need to do is consider the person's role and think about whether there's any flexibility you can bring in to have them work on different sites, work around the challenge. It's a case of working through it case by case and trying to come up with a solution, I think, at the moment. But certainly that's one where I can imagine many employers might get to the stage of thinking, well, we need to dismiss them. And that comes back to the question of whether it's reasonable to expect people to be vaccinated, thinking about whether we've got any discrimination issues in the background, and trying to have that dialogue with staff as clearly as you can and as clearly as they'll let you, to try and find a mutually agreeable way forward that still satisfies your business needs and the client needs.
Fantastic.
That's great, Caroline. Thank you very much for that and for all your help today. It's certainly a lot of food for thought there, and I think it must be a very interesting time being an employment lawyer, since
Indeed, yeah.
with changes, as she mentioned, Caroline mentioned earlier, changes every day happening. If anybody needs any input from Caroline on any employment issues, I think you've got maybe a page in the next one that shows you how to contact yourself, Caroline.
Yes, that's right. Just Employment Law's website is there, and we'd be delighted to hear from anyone if we can help with any employer or workplace issues. Thank you.
Okay, so and in terms of any payroll issue, related payroll issues and HR issues, we can help as well. Thanks very much to both of you for today. Just a quick one at the end is just to say our July webinar. It's the third in our business challenges themed webinar, the roadmap out of lockdown, the third part of it, and we'll be dealing with diversification, selling online, cloud accounting, and app stacks. So if you want to know more about that, please join us next month, and we'll be advertising the date and time shortly. So thanks very much, everybody, for joining us today, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.